There it is. And I am going to kind of, oh, Tanisha did what I was just about to do. Welcome everybody. We're going to get all of our panelists spotlighted. And I'm just going to do a quick intro of what we're here to do today. I know we have some new folks in the room. We have our panelists here in the room. And it's also like summer brain time. I don't know about you all, but sort of we're in summer brain world. So just to kind of bring us all to the space and what we're here for. And then I'm going to pass it over to Julia and the panelists to go from there. So I'm Missy Carpenter. I use she and her pronouns. I'm an independent consultant in Chicago, supporting Strive Together and Tanisha on the action team, focused on kind of how we move decision-making to community power, to folks that are most affected by the decisions being made. So super excited specifically about this conversation, a youth power panel. We have a variety of amazing humans to kind of share their experience building and using youth power in their communities. And I know there's a variety of folks in the room from the partnerships, some that are new and some that are not, but just to kind of name the goal for the biggest goals for today. We're all in this room because we want to do some things differently to ensure that youth are leading their own future, their own work, and their own goals. And so we're here in a learning space to get better at this, especially as adults. And also to figure out how we teach others in our system to be better at this, to identify where our system needs improvement, to identify where our work needs improvement, where our behaviors need improvement, and where there are bright spots that we can build from and support better. So not just what we each can do, but sort of how we can help look at all of the work of our partnerships to do this as well. So I'm going to leave it at that. And then I'm going to hand it on over to Julia, who can introduce themselves and then kind of start us off for the rest of the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Missy. Hi, everybody. My name is Julia. I use she or they pronouns. I am a youth organizer. I work with a youth-run activist organization based here in Detroit called Detroit Area Youth Uniting Michigan, or DAM. And so my work is largely focused around community organizing trainings for young people, and then supporting any kinds of campaigns, political actions, and lobbying or advocacy activity that they want to do to try and make change at the city, state, or local, city, state, or federal level. So I've been doing that for quite a few years and helped found this organization, DAM, out of that work. And I'm just going to be the moderator today, asking questions, and then I'm going to let our youth panelists sort of back and forth off of each other. So I'll hand it over to them to start with introductions. Do any of you want to go first?
I could go ahead and go first. First of all, sorry, I'm not in a place where I can turn my camera on because of the Wi-Fi. But my name is Hafiza Khalik. I use she or they pronouns. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I also work with the same organization Julia is from. I'm the chair of the organization, so Julia works for me. But I'm a rising senior at Cass Technical High School in Detroit. And I spend most of my time organizing around social justice issues. I sit on a few youth leadership councils across the federal and state level. And I also do most of my organizing work with DAM. Our most recent campaign that I was able to help organize around was the uniform policy. And so this whole year, I, alongside the other youth organizers from DAM, we have been working on removing the uniform policy from our school district. And so that's kind of the issues that DAM works around. We are completely youth run and youth led, which is amazing because there aren't many spaces that are youth run. But yeah, DAM does a lot of amazing work. And I do spend most of my time organizing with DAM. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Hafiza. Do we have a youth panelist who wants to go next?
I can go ahead. Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Okeke, and I am a rising senior at the University of Chicago studying international relations. I'm also a board member at Power California, and before joining the board, I was voted 16 Youth Organizer. I joined the organization in April 2019 when I was a student board member for LAUSD. That's one example of how, systems, governments can incorporate young people is by giving them leadership positions like sitting on a school board and being able to cast a non-binding vote as well as create resolutions. And in that role, I wanted to study the feasibility of expanding voting rights to young people, particularly 16 and 17-year-olds, to vote in school board elections, and partnered with Power California to pass that resolution, and then joined them in the summer to work on a statewide coalition to do that in other places across the state, and then also for state elections. Since then, I've now joined the board and advised on a variety of different campaigns, including our COVID-19 response, which was noting the unique ways that young people were falling through the cracks of the federal COVID-19 response. And I've also been working on developing an eye center for the nonprofit sector in California that allows nonprofits to come together, get onboarded, get the resources they need to be successful nonprofits.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tyler. Emma, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey y'all, I'm Amet or Emma. I have 1,000 names. I use she, her, and Zizum pronouns. I am a youth organizer with the Providence Student Union based out of Providence, Rhode Island. I'm a rising senior at Classical High School here. I have been on the leadership team of the Providence Student Union for the past 2 or 3 years. We've done a lot of campaigns in my time, but some of the most memorable ones are working to get school resource officers or police officers out of our schools and replace them with counselors and mental health workers because we believe that having school resource officers in schools is effectively criminalizing youth, and that is like unproductive and harmful. I've also done a bunch of organizing independently of the organization, and I'm also a street medic with the Trash City Medic Collective. We provide autonomous medical care both at protests and independently of that, trying to build alternatives to the capitalist and colonial medical system that we know and hate. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Em. So before I hop into the first question, I just want to let those who are in our audience and listening know if you have questions. We are going to do a Q&A at the end. We have 2 main discussion questions, and then once we're done with those 2, it'll be your turn. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat, and we will try to get to them when we get to the Q&A at the end. So my first question for our panelists is, how is social change work better when it is led by youth? And what specific impact have you seen when youth lead? Does anybody want to start with that one?
I can start us off. I think that the most obvious way in which that social work is better when it's led by youth is that youth are often the most affected by social justice issues, right? Whereas, like, take the Counters Not Cops campaign, for example. Everybody in the city of Providence and in this country is affected by, the police state under which we live. But if you're a student with a police officer in your school who you see every day, your chance of being affected by police violence increase exponentially. And there are 1,000 examples of this, whether it be on race, gender, sexuality, etc., religion. Students are often the most victimized by national injustices. And also, if we're looking at specifically education contexts, we are the ones who know what we're going through the best, right? You can listen to parents, but parents only know what they know because of us. Teachers only know what they know because of us. We understand what's going on to the students because we are the students. So when reins of power are handed to students, when students are put in decision-making positions, we can make the changes that we want to see, and we can make them in the ways that we need them to happen at the speed at which they need to happen, because at the end of the day, it affects us. One of the other noted benefits of having youth organize is I'm with my organization, the Providence Student Union, for 4 years, maybe 5 if I stick around next year to do some mentoring, right? So at maximum, the amount of work I can do is limited to those 4 years. So I have an intrinsic motivation to get stuff done quickly. right? In the same way that someone whose job it is to work for one of these orgs might not. If your job is to work for this nonprofit and you're going to be there for the next 20 years, you have 20 years to get stuff done. I have 4. If I want to get these cops out of schools while I'm here, I have a year left to do it, right? So I got to get to work. Yeah.
Thank you. I love that note about the urgency. That's really, really powerful. Thank you, Am. Anybody want to go next?
I can go ahead. I think one, engaging young people in social change and putting them at the forefront of social change makes the work more sustainable. For example, our executive director at Power California, Luis Sanchez, became politicized during the Chicano movement in Los Angeles in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And then when he was older, went ahead and created an organization that continues to keep that work up of politicizing young people and engaging them in political change around political issues that affect their daily lives and the lives of their families. It makes sure that the work, does not end with you all, but it is passed down from generation to generation. And I think that's why it's an important note, not only to note that it's important for young people to be involved in the work, but for young people to be involved in the work alongside adult allyship and for our work to be intergenerational. I think another thing is that it allows us to take advantage of the creativity of young people. As Em said, we usually, when we're in an organization, we don't really have a lot of time there because also being young means that we're constantly in transition. We're in high school at one point, then we're off across the state or across the country to go to college, and then we're finding jobs, going to grad school. So we're very solutions oriented, and we're very focused on the task at hand and working as efficiently and as quickly as possible. And that allows us to be creative about what we think is possible and what we think we should be implementing when it comes to either a campaign or a policy that we're trying to change or get implemented. I think another point that I want to make is that engaging young people especially if you work around youth issues, ensures that the work is not patronizing and that your adult allyship is truly allyship. And I think this is something that can get missing, especially when folks work with the 18 to 29 age range. We kind of forget that, young people at that age, some of them are executive directors of nonprofits. Some of them are like startup CEOs. Many of them do like a lot of incredible work and have dynamic responsibilities, and engaging young people around issues that concern their future recognizes that work and kind of returns much of that power back to young people.
Those are really great points. Hafiza, do you want to share your answer?
Yes, I was just going to unmute. I think one of the most important things to first of all note is I'm going to go ahead and quote Julia right here because they say this like every time there's an organizing training. Almost, if not all of the movements were created by young people, which is so important because young people are going to inhabit this planet longer than anyone else. And we are often left at a disadvantage. Even if you look at the Roe v. Wade situation right now, yes, it's going to create harder barriers to access abortion, but did young people have access to abortion? They did not. And there are many like parental consent laws around abortion when it comes to young people. And so many times young people are more disadvantaged, especially more than adults. And because we will live longer, we will have to live with these existing laws longer than anyone else in the world. And that is why it creates so much urgency for young people to get involved, because this, if you're older, this may be like for like 10 years of your remaining life, but for us, it's our entire future. And when we think about our future, that is not the future that we want. And that's why like there have been like growing numbers of like young people who are becoming organizers and activists across the world, even when it comes to like climate and reproductive rights, because we are going to live the longest and we are going to live with the consequences of some of these policies that are changing our lives, that are going to change what rights we have in the future, what rights we have now. And it also reminds us that we can't move backwards. And if we do move backwards, then younger generations, as we grow older, are also going to be at a disadvantage. And so that's why I think youth voice is really important when it comes to social justice issues, because we are at a disadvantage. We are not allowed to vote. And voting is really important, but we are not allowed to vote. And so the school board members that get elected, they get elected by the general public and not young people that are affected by the policies that they create in schools. And that is why it's important to, sorry, it's really hot, but that is why it's important to center youth voice, why it's important to prioritize youth voice, and why it's important to listen to young people.
Thank you, Lisa. That's really powerful. And it is really hot in Detroit. I know some of you might not be here in Detroit. It's 92 degrees with like a million humidity. So we're struggling over here with no air conditioning. So thank you so much, panelists. Is there anybody, Em or Tyler, did you want to respond to any of what you heard from the other panelists before we move to the next question?
I have one thing I want to add on to Habiza's thing, which is that youth are not only the most affected, we've also always been at the forefront of change, right? Like if you think back to almost every civil rights movement in America and worldwide, if you think back to the revolutions that have been fought, if you think back to any of these, it's young people. And young people can be a broad category, like under 30, right? But like it's the teenagers and the 20-somethings who make things happen, as much as I hate to say it. So there's like this history that we draw on based on whatever identities we hold, things like that. Like Tyler mentioned that one of the people who brought him up, was politicized during the Chicano movement, right? Which was a youth-led movement. So when we make these roots now, when we teach youth how to organize, when we give youth power, not only are we empowering the youth of today, but we're also empowering the youth of tomorrow, right? Because then if I have done this at 17, when I'm, 30, when I'm 40, I can be in, roles like Julia's in now, and I can mentor youth coming up and through maybe different struggles, maybe same facets of the same struggles. And we can grow together from there. And I already have had the experience, plus, 30 years at that point.
That's super real. Thanks, Em. Tyler, did you have any last thoughts?
Nothing unique, but I would just hone in on the point that young people are incredibly talented and gifted. Power California has put a lot of money into making it known that young people, like this generation, especially in California, is the most diverse and the largest ever. And there's a lot that we can benefit from when we listen to and loop young people into leadership roles, not just in the patronizing sense of giving them a script to read, but giving them actual power and authority to make decisions, and to think critically about how to solve problems that affect their daily lives.
Thank you for that, Tyler. And another way that I always like to share about how that social change work is much better when young people are at the lead of it is how insistent young people are that this stuff should be fun, and that social justice work should not be boring and a struggle and just traumatizing and awful and 7-hour meetings going till midnight.
I have such strong feelings about this. There's this book by Ricky Montgomery and Carla Bergman called Joyful Militancy, which if you haven't read, I recommend that everybody read. I can put that in the chat. But basically it outlines that militancy and organizing work should operate under the Spinozan definition of joy, right? Which is a fancy academic way of saying it should expand your capacity to feel, right? It's not going to feel good all the time. It is traumatizing. It does suck. Losing is awful. But as much as you're crying, as much as you're stressing, as much as you're experiencing those emotions, you should actually be feeling them, right? We shouldn't become these hollow husks that I know everybody in the organizing world can feel when you're on your third coalition meeting of the week and you're like, what have I ever done with my life? Why am I doing this? Thank you, Missy. Right. And there's that feeling of and when you're actually plugged in and really doing the work and you're doing it with people you love and care for, whether you're laughing or crying, you're feeling your emotions and you're in your body. And when we do organizing work, we should feel like that most of the time. That should be the primary way we're feeling. We shouldn't be shutting down our emotions, shutting down parts of ourselves, because those are the worlds we want to live in, right? I want to live in a world in which I can feel all of my emotions to the fullest capacity that I can. So if I want to live in that world, I should be organizing like I already do.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and it was 100% young people who taught me that, right? Because young people will not show up to some stuff that they think is going to be terribly, horribly boring. Whereas sometimes as adults, we're too brainwashed into it. We're like, well, I gotta go. So super, super important. Tyler, I saw you unmute. Did you want to add to that?
Just the last point, like to give us an example. I think like, and we've been talking about it, the Chicano movement is a perfect example of, was it joyful militancy? I mean, these were people who were facing like a right-wing Republican governor that wanted to cut undocumented immigrants out of access to healthcare, out of access to a public education. And so much was on the line, and it was a very intense organizing experience. But they built alliances across generations. They used arts, culture, music to really find their purpose and hone in on their culture and what it means to be organizing together and to care so much about each other that you put your lives and your futures on the line. Many of them were like beat during protests. Many of them faced expulsion. Many of them faced criminal prosecution. And this movement has gone on to really shape our state in dynamic ways. Lots of state legislators were former organizers in the Chicano movement. Many of them are now executive directors, civic leaders. Many of them have gotten married to each other and like are having families. And it's a very beautiful and dynamic experience. And that's kind of what we get when we involve young people in organizing around many of these tough, difficult issues, is that we find ways to survive and we find ways to build dynamic relationships with each other in spite of all of the calamity and suffering that we face.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Thank you, Tyler. Hafiza, did you want to speak to that anymore before we move to the next question?
I'm all good.
Okay, all right, we'll go to the next question. So it's a great question. So the question is really broad. What kinds of new conditions are needed for youth leadership in our spaces, in our programs, in our world? And then how can we make sure adults are accountable to youth in our programs? So does anybody want to speak to what that looks like?
I can go ahead and take a stab at the first question. I would just also like to say, like, making sure that, like, at times I know that adults can feel uncomfortable kind of like handing the torch to young people or allowing them to have some sort of power. So being comfortable with the fact that young people can have power and they should have power, especially in places like schools, because education is something that affects us for the rest of our lives, and future generations. And we should absolutely have a say in what we are learning, and what, like, the conditions we see in our schools. So that's the first thing. The second thing is compensation for youth and their time, is also something that you don't see a lot of. Young people are taking the forefront of these movements. They are spearheading campaigns, they are spearheading the movement, and it is mentally exhausting to go to school, to have extracurriculars, to take standardized tests, to take rigorous courses, apply to colleges, all while changing the world. It's really hard, and it's extremely draining. And I don't think people realize that our time is also valuable. And so compensating youth for their time and not expecting them to do this work, because it is so draining to have to wake up every day and see a new issue, and continue to stay motivated. And it's not to say that, we're in it for the money, because we are in it for humanity, and for the good of the people, but also having some sort of compensation to show value of our time, because time and time again, they have shown that our time is not valuable. And so that's something that's, really important, that should be like a new condition in these organizing spaces, because, like, once again, time is valuable.
Amat?
Yeah, I can jump off of that. I think, I mean, part of that also is like, I don't really have time for a normal job during the school year because what I'm doing is organizing, right? Between the Meta Collective, the student union, and the organizing I'm doing on my own, I probably have, and then homework, maybe an hour or two, maybe three if I'm lucky, a day that I'm not doing something, which isn't, and it's not consistent enough or not on a weird schedule enough that I can, reliably like hold down a job. So I need to be compensated by the orgs that I work for. Like I'm being compensated for this and I'm upfront about that, right? And like I need that in order to do it because I'm taking time off from my job in order to be here and I need the money for college and for whatever. So I think that it's really important that youth organizers don't feel any shame about asking for money. We are working, right? And if we're working not outside, if we're working outside of the nonprofit sector, it's a different thing. But if we're working for nonprofits who can afford to pay us, we should be getting paid. If nonprofits are paying their adult staff, we should be getting paid. And then part of this question also, right, is that accountability piece. In Providence, the school district tried to do like youth leadership councils, but they had no power. Nobody was accountable to them. They would make decisions and nothing would happen, right? And like I have a few friends who were on them and they're like, yeah, we had all these great ideas and nothing ever came of them. And if something did, it was like a one-off, like here's a little bone, right? I have been in meetings with more than one different superintendent because my school district is bad enough that we've had three, and I've been there for 3 years, or I've been there for longer than 3 years. But while I've been with the student union, we've had 3 different superintendents in 3 years because but with each and every one of them, except for the most recent one who's actually pretty cool, for the previous two, I've been like gaslit in meetings by them because they have no accountability to students or to organizers or to anything beyond, their boss and whoever they're beholden to. Which is both a product of the fact that we have no electoral power, which is where what Tyler was working on is so important, right? If we have the power to vote these people out, maybe they'll listen to us. And also a result of like just a lack of respect, right? Because there's the parts of this that you can change on an institutional basis. Like you can give youth more power, but if you don't change the way in which you're thinking about youth, nothing's actually going to change, right? One of the reasons I appreciate the new superintendent as much as I do is that when we walk into a meeting with him, I feel like I'm a peer of his, right? I know as much about what's going on in my school as he does. He might have a doctorate, right? But I'm a student. I have the lived experience that he doesn't have, right? So when I walk into that room and I feel seen and I feel that my knowledge and experience as an organizer and as a student is being acknowledged, and I can like feel from him when he's listening that he A, respects me, and is B, taking the information for what it is as information and not as me trying to like get clout or whatever. It feels different and it feels better and it sustains my capacity to do the work. And it also means that we're going to win more.
Yeah, I think what I'll add is that the most important condition, I think, is narrative change. Like, I think we have to change what we think about young people, what we think they're capable of. This was especially important working on Vote at 16, advocating to expand voting rights, huge responsibility, to 16 and 17-year-olds. We had to first overcome the challenge that people thought we weren't interested in politics. We had to overcome the challenge that people thought that we weren't going to follow politics and would vote irresponsibly. And how we did that was by doing a youth poll of California young people and finding that like over half of young people in our state considered themselves publicly engaged. 25% participated in a protest in the last 3 months. Over half have boycotted a product before or practice or engage in what they would consider ethical consumption. Many of them identified, over half of them identified as part of some type of movement, whether that be Black Lives Matter or a movement organizing around gender or sexuality equity. And that was like our first challenge, is that noticing that young people are, incredibly responsible. Many of them in our state take up leadership responsibilities within the home, like working and providing for their family, taking care of their younger siblings, translating documents for their immigrant parents. And that was like what we needed to hone in, is that young people are incredibly capable. And that means that we can not only vote for our elected officials, but we can even be our own elected officials and make leadership decisions and about policies that affect our lives. I think the second point I'd like to make would have to be just honing in on compensation. And this is not only because like we're doing work and we should be paid for it also, but that we lose a lot of talent, especially among low-income young people, when they have to work like retail jobs or other jobs instead of youth organizing and working to transform the conditions that require them to work as high school students. And when they're offered a wage that, you know, lightens their burden significantly, our organization has been creative in like using stipends to even extend financial compensation to undocumented people, youth organizers in our organization. And that has been really great in allowing them to do the work of transforming systems and fighting for social change while also providing for their family and contributing to their family's financial security. I think the last point I'd like to make would be it's important that we actually incorporate young people in our leadership structures and in our nonprofit governance models. For example, Power California has a youth board member and is working to expand the number of seats they offer to young people. My school district, Los Angeles Unified School District, had a student board member who had a non-binding vote that was recorded, but was able to author resolutions and had their comments publicly televised, and that allowed their experience and what they had to say to have lots of weight. So it's important that outside of like councils, right, that like operate separately and far off from how the organization is governed, that we actually incorporate young people in how decisions are made in the organization and how the organization and its executives are held accountable.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you so much. Hafiza or Emma, did you want to respond to either any of what you've heard on the panel so far? Do you want to have a conversation with each other about this question?
I think that one of the other big conditions with youth organizing, I just want to first reflect that like Visa and Tyler have been amazing. They're kind of incredible organizers. Like I have so much respect for my peers and especially for these two of my peers. I've met Tyler before. I haven't met Hafiza before, but you're both just like incredible. Everything you're saying is amazing. Yeah, this makes me feel much more confident that we will win. But I think that one of the big things is that like we're being organizers in teenage hormones, right? Like we're teenagers, right? We have those like really big emotions. We have that like unpredictability. So on the one hand, there has to be space for us to be teenagers. One of the biggest things with organizing as much as I have, as young as I have, is that I feel very adultified, right? Both as a trans woman, that's one of the products of being a trans woman, and also as an organizer, I feel like I haven't really got to experience like high school because I've spent almost all of my time either organizing or doing organizing adjacent things, right? So like on the one hand, there needs to be space for us to like be a kid and mess up and do that. And we can't expect it to be as perfect or as whatever as you would expect an adult, you know, school board member or an adult even organizer to be, because, you know, I was 14 when I joined the student union, right? It's unreasonable to expect a 14-year-old to be as mature as a 30-year-old. That's just not fair. And it means that when you're interacting with us, treat us with a modicum of respect, treat us like a peer, and understand that developmentally we might not be 100% there. And that doesn't impact our decision-making or what we're advocating for, but it might impact the way we're responding to you, and it should definitely impact the way you're responding to us. In addition, I think that like there's that on the one hand, and then on the other hand there's the part of like, and let us make decisions. Like just because we're teenagers doesn't mean we don't know what we're talking about. There have been times both within my organization from higher ups, like adults in my org, and from adults in the school board or whatever, where we have made a decision and we thought we were going through with it, and at the last second it's either pulled or something goes wrong and it's changed and we aren't checked in with, right? There's this assumption that, well, you're a teenager, you can't make decisions under pressure, and that's just not accurate. Some of the people I would trust, like in the streets with my life the most, are other 17-year-olds who have been doing this with for 2 years, who have seen respond to like Proud Boys showing up to our protests. Like, you know, Proud Boys show up, we chant them down, they leave, no one gets hurt, right? We can de-escalate, we can do that. Don't, like, we have been, as much as it sucks, a lot of us have been turned into like small adults way too young. Especially if folks are like Black or of color or trans or of an experience in which that is one of the symptoms of it. So on the one hand, try to leave space for us to be a kid. And on the other hand, when we're acting like an adult, respect that.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, that's really, really powerful. And just to uplift your comments there about the adultification process, I can share an experience that we had in DAM where we had a gift card donated to us, and some of our board members were able to request some mental health and like wellness items as a result of this donation. And it just really hit me that these young people were folks who had led banner drops and meeting takeovers and protests in the street and done just like incredibly intensive, like you said, adultified type leadership work. But we're asking us for things like stuffed animals and music and soft blankets and candles. And it was just like it was a realization for me in that moment of exactly what you are saying there, Em, of like, these are still kids who need care and shelter and space and processing and all of those important things that adolescence calls for. So thanks for lifting that up. I just want to give one more opportunity. Hafiza, do you want to speak to that last question about conditions one more time? Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I'm all good, thank you.
I want to open up to the audience. If you have any questions for our panelists, if you can drop them in the chat, we would love to hear from you about what you still want to know more about. I'll give it a couple minutes, and while they're asking questions, I just want to lift up, Em, you talked about how awesome Tyler and Hafiza are, and they both echoed in the chat how awesome you are, and I just want to double underline how awesome all three of you are, and that I think a lot of us, I can probably speak for the adults in this space, really just appreciate you being out here sharing your wisdom and sharing all this work that you've done for the community and all that you've learned from it. You're all amazing. And like Em said, I really believe that we will win because we're being pushed by your incredible force. So any questions in the chat? If not, I'm going to ask the panelists if you have questions for each other. And I see Missy's question in the chat also is, what is something adults often do that they mean well, but it actually gets in the way of power? It's a great question. So you can answer that question or you can ask the question.
I'm happy to answer Missy's question. I think that a lot of folks both within youth orgs and within like school departments feel very protective of us, which is fair because I feel very protective of, you know, my freshmen. Like, I no, don't put your hands on them. Like, I just have, like, I get that maternal instinct. I understand it. And also, like, there's an element of like, part of being a teenager is messing up, right? And if we're not allowed to mess up, whether it be in the streets, whether it be in a school board meeting, whatever, if we're like so protected from making any decision that could like cause harm if we do the wrong one, that we're never able to make decisions in those spaces, we'll never learn how, right? And there are ways in which you can like cushion our fall. Like if we mess up, ways in which to be like, okay, well, that was a bad choice. We shouldn't have done that. And here's how we recover with grace and guiding us through that, right? But we also, you know, should be able to mess up. Like that is okay. It's part of why you want to get cops out of schools, right? Because, you know, in the same way that a 17-year-old doing something stupid shouldn't be rewarded with a prison sentence, a 17-year-old doing something stupid shouldn't be rewarded with losing our job.
Yeah. Tyler or Hafiza, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think one common mistake is where amplification or wanting to center young people becomes using young people as tokens. And it's honestly something that's incredibly difficult to navigate, even among like organizations that like have lots of experience working with young people. But I think like the solution is honestly having conversations with the people you're organizing and the young people you're engaging with, and making sure that they're comfortable with everything and that like their voice is what's shining through and their authentic voice, and not necessarily what is useful for the organization, or what you all find is useful about their identity. And I can also use this opportunity to take the second question. How can we support follow through with the changes youth are trying to implement? Like obviously, like we go to school and that's like our full-time occupation. But I think like people who work 40 hours a week on the issues we care about, like a lot of their job can include like the follow through or the follow up. Like let's say we're having a meeting, young people are speaking to elected officials about an education policy or a public safety issue. After that meeting ends, like taking those notes and really setting up those follow-up meetings and those follow-up conversations for young people when they have the time to continue that work is a great way for adult allies to facilitate like the implementation of things that young people care about and issues that they want to see changed.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Yeah, absolutely. Those are really good examples. So thanks for taking both questions. So the second question that Tanisha lifted up from Esme is how can we support follow through with the changes youth are trying to implement? So it's kind of a question about how adults can be helpful or can be useful in youth leadership spaces. Hafiza, do you have any thoughts about that?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so there's two questions on the table. The first one is, what is something adults often do that they mean well, but it actually gets in the way of youth power? And the second question is, how can adults support youth or support follow through with the changes that youth are trying to implement?
I think just for the second question, I would say just listening to young voices and handing off that power. And like that's something that needs to, just because of like power dynamics and hierarchy, it's harder for young people to feel like they're comfortable with speaking up. So I think giving the reassurance to young people what they do, and taking in the information and listening more than anything, as well as like handing off the power to also say, even if you don't agree with them, that you understand that it's a new generation, and your views will not completely be the same, or oriented the same ways, and that's totally okay. But also knowing when to step back is important, because if young people are asking for power, the last thing we want is for you to advocate for that power. We want to advocate for it, and we do need your support, but we don't want you to take the lead on advocating for that. That is something that we want to do, that we feel responsible to do. And so understanding when to step back, I would say is really important.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, absolutely. And Em, I want to come back to you for that second question, especially. Did you want to add any thoughts to any of this?
Sure. Yeah, so I see the rephrasing to how can we support you in this. I think, there's a few angles to this, right? First of all, our orgs need to pay rent. So if you have money, donations are always great. Love it when PSD gets a big donation and either my wage goes up or we get like new snacks in the fridge or whatever. Like for a small org like this, if you donate any money, it will go immediately to something that will make youth's lives better. We don't have enough bureaucracy for it to get lost. Like there's 4 adults who work in my org, 3 of which who are salaried. Like no one's getting a bonus at the end of the year. But so there's that, right? There's like that, like we need to keep the lights on, things like that. And then there's also the aspect of just like like being a body when we're doing things, right? I can't tell you how many times, how good it feels when we're doing protests or marches or things like that about the school. And we have like secretaries from the school or like parents or community members or people from the school board who just join us, right? And it's sometimes different when they're the people we're protesting and you're like, why are you here? Go make this law. But most of the time it feels really good to be like, oh, this isn't just students, right? We want to build that intergenerational power. So when you demonstrate to us by putting your body where we need your body to be as someone who, you know, might be a larger human being, just in terms of like you're older or more steady on your feet or whatever, and understanding the ways in which you can use the privilege that, you know, you have in your body to help protect youth and help be with youth, and all that while still following our leadership, it can feel really empowering to be like, oh, these aren't just my classmates marching behind me. This is also like random adults. It makes us feel like trusted and respected in a different kind of way.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much for that. I love the really tangible strategies that y'all have lifted up here. And I just want to like underline that one of the things we talk about in DAM adult ally trainings, which we have like a whole list of do's and don'ts for adult allies, or actually we renamed them red flags and green flags because the adults didn't like when we told them what to do and not to do. But the red flags and green flags, one of the things it says on there is instead of offering like critique, offering support. So a lot of the time as adults, we're conditioned to critique young people. And so we can find the little holes in whatever plan they might have. And so just reconditioning ourselves to, instead of saying, hey, you're not going to be loud enough for this crowd, they're not going to be able to hear you. Instead saying, I have a microphone at my organization, I can bring it to the protest, something like that. So those are some of the kinds of support that sort of parallel the financial support that folks were talking about, stipends and paying young people for their labor. You can also support with supplies because adults have access to lots more material and capital supplies. So the next question I see in the chat, and this will probably be our last one because we're getting on time, but what advice do you have for how adults who work with youth can, for how they can find work with youth organizing orgs and groups, or helping youth serving orgs identify opportunities for organizing? So I think I'm hearing there about like partnership and coalition building with youth-led organizations. How can those adult-led youth serving orgs come in and partner with those youth organizing groups?
Yeah, and if I may just add a quick clarification that's specific to a lot of people in this particular room, is that a lot of times this work comes like the goals are developed with Boys and Girls Club or after school programs or school districts that serve young people, quote unquote, but may not actually organize or support organizing that youth are doing. And sometimes it can be hard to cross past those two different ways. And so I'd love to just hear people's thoughts on how folks in this room can identify where youth organizing and youth organizers are working and how to partner and support.
Any advice from our panelists how to do that? It's definitely hard because there's a divide. Yeah, go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, I can try to answer this. I think with partnerships, it depends on where like there's synergy with youth organizers. Like if you're a campaign-based organization, it might make sense to partner with the youth-based organization. But if that's not the case, I think simply like engaging the young people you serve in the decision-making process of the organization, like I mentioned before, whether that be on your board or whether that be in a variety of different ways, is a great first step.
I can speak to this. So there's a few ways you can do this. Tyler outlined a few of them. Another good question is, why do you want young people involved, right? Like if you're a youth serving org, that's one thing, but if you're like, sometimes there will be orgs that work near youth and don't necessarily work with youth. And at that point, sometimes it's best to just work with each other on an organizational level, right? Like the student union has weird ties to the local teachers union because the local teachers union has weird history, but we have ties to local teachers union, right? Who aren't necessarily like youth led or youth serving, but they're teachers. So they do, in the end of the day, work with us, right? So there's that. The other thing is that if you're not a like occupation or environment based thing, there are probably youth in your community, right? If you're a neighborhood organization, there are probably kids in your neighborhood, right? There are like if you're a union, there's probably kids who work for the people in your union. There's definitely almost all universally youth in people's communities. And what, you know, bringing youth into the work can look like is just bringing those people to your meetings, making your meetings accessible for youth, not putting them when people have school, not putting them like on school nights, putting them on the weekends, if that's possible, like things like that, adapting your schedule, adapting the kinds of meetings you're having, how long your meetings are, what platforms they're on, so that you can have youth join, right? So thinking about like the access needs of different generations and different like age brackets in the world we live in.
Thanks, Emma. Hafiza, any thoughts on this question? How to connect with youth organizing groups? Not at the moment. Okay, awesome. And I see that Candice popped a really great resource from FCYO Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing in the chat, which is the web platform, the organizing landscape map, the youth organizing landscape map. So that could also help folks address and identify youth organizers in their community. I really appreciate what Tyler and Emma lifted up about not trying to start things from scratch if you don't have to. I've seen a lot of adult-led organizations in Detroit try to do that. And then they try to recruit our students, and our students are like, but we're really busy. We don't have time to fund and found and start and run an entire new organization for you, for your organization, just because you want us to. So super, super great. And then the last question, just if anyone has some quick thoughts on this one from Janine. A lot of these schools and even these institutions that work alongside schools might have really patronizing attitudes and ways that they talk and think about students. What successful strategies have you seen to change that patronizing and adultist culture? Any thoughts?
I mean, I can take this and use Los Angeles Unified School District as a case study. I think like there's a statewide law that requires every school to have a school site council. So that's one space where young people can engage not only with like their teachers and administrators, but their parents are alongside. LAUSD in particular has taken this a step forward and has like hired and staffed an office called the Student Empowerment Unit, which brings professionals who are trained in this language of empowering students to develop a variety of programs that do just that. One of them is the student board member who sits on the governing board of the school district. And then the second program that they do is the Superintendent Student Advisory Council, which meets with the school superintendent or the school district superintendent monthly to advise usually on a single topic or a short list of topics. And then they're also provided funding to do school site projects at their schools, projects that they lead. So that's like one example or a few examples about how a school district in particular can go about empowering students in a way that actually gives them the power and agency to make decisions and to change systems.
Thank you, Tyler. Absolutely. Hafiza, do you have any thoughts you want to share about this changing that patronizing adultist culture in some of our schools? And I think folks are dropping resources in the chat too. Any final thoughts you want to share?
It was Fisa wanted to say lowering the voting age is a great start, which I agree with. I think that when people in power are actually beholden to us and they're like, hey, you're going to get me in office. And you're like, yeah, we are. What if you did something for us? That's like big and important. And I feel like The other part of it is just like fundamental respect, right? See us as organizers, see us as people, see us as equals and peers. Don't see us as like youth in that pejorative context, right? I am as smart as anyone else, you know, on any board, on any council, because I have the lived experience to back me up.
Thank you. Mic drop. We can end it there. So thank you all to the youth organizers here who have shared their incredible wisdom and knowledge and experience with us. I just want to say, you know, that this is hard to do. And I think that you have shared some real important, tangible steps that our participants and listeners can take. And also want to thank our participants and listeners for listening and being open and receiving all of this wisdom. So just applause to all of you. And I'll hand it back to Missy for our closing.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything better to say than how this all already closed out. So I deeply want to share appreciation on behalf of everyone in the room, myself, Tanisha, Strive Together, to Julia, Hafisa, and Tyler. Thank you so much for being willing to share your time and your wisdom and just spark some thinking for folks in this room. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their summer, and Action Team participants will see you in a few weeks in August. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Missy.
Thank you
Have a great
so
rest of your day.
much.